Hi, I'm John P. Do you know who or what fpjourne is? If not, or perhaps you do and you just want to hear more about him and it, watch this video, roll the intro. And we are back. You are chatting with John P. Today we're going to be talking about fpjourne, and we're going to talk a little bit about the brand for those of you that are not familiar with the brand. We're not going to get into it that deep and talk about all the products in their line. Hopefully someday I will release a video about that, because honestly this is a very hot and up-and-coming ultra high-end brand. But what we are going to do is we're going to talk about one specific watch from their collection, and it's going to be a size of the watch that has been discontinued, so to speak. They didn't quite call it that, but it's the size is it's a much larger size today. So we're going to talk about that, and then we're going to move on to a camera angle that I'm introducing. I have another camera here that's going to give us close-ups and allow me to do a little bit of a everyman's or a common man's review of the fpjourne. I'm not going to get into too much specifics about the technical functionality of it, more so than the high level, because I'm not a watchmaker, but I will be getting into some of the nitty-gritty, and it should be very interesting for you. Also, I would like to thank you for liking and subscribing. When you like this video and other videos of mine, what happens is the YouTube algorithm, or the algo, sees this and it bumps it up and allows other watch geeks like you to discover the videos that I make. So if you do like them and you do hit that like button, others will see the videos and you'll be able to talk about it in the comments below. And subscribe, because I do appreciate it. And check out delraywatch.com. The holiday season is still kind of going on, and we have some very cool watches for you to check out. Going into the wristwatch check, as YouTubers do, today on my wrist I have nothing. Segue into the topic today, fpjourne. What I have here on the table is the Journe Octa Lune in platinum with the 38mm case size. So it is the older Octa Lune. We'll give you a little shot here on cam, even though we're about to talk into it a little more, have a picture here, and get into the close-up view. So I do like this watch. I like this watch. I can't say that it's my favorite of watches, but if you're into ultra high-end, very cool watch. And now we're going to start talking about it and the fpjourne brand and fpjourne as a person. So fpjourne, Francois Paul Journe is his name, and basically this guy is a French guy turned watchmaker. He went to the Paris School of Watchmaking. You know, I believe he was born in the late 50s or something like that, so he's a bit of an older gentleman. You know, my apologies to any older gentlemen that are watching this, but you know, he is certainly not the youngest of guys. But what this does mean is he has a lot of experience creating watches, and the whole kind of mantra behind fpjourne is translated into something that's on the watch dials. It's on the watches, and it's on pretty much all of their propaganda, and that is Invenit et fecit. And sorry if I butchered that for those of you that are all about the Latin language, which is a dead language, unfortunately. But nonetheless, it pretty much means that he designed it and made it. Roughly translated, something along those lines. So basically, fpjourne, Francois Paul, he designs and he makes everything. And he's been doing this since he started creating watches. And specifically, he really focuses on the movements and the technical functionality and the prowess behind the movements. And that's really kind of, the main focal point of the brand. So when we get into it and I do the review of the specific Octa Lune here that I have for you, the thing to keep in mind is the watches that this brand, this manufacturer creates, everything is created by them. This is in-house for those of you that are not aware, but they are creating these movements specifically for the technical functionality behind this watch. I mean, this brand is a watch geek's watch. It can be a piece of jewelry, but I mean, if you are a watch buff, and specifically a high-end watch buff, this is really more of a piece of art, and it really translates something that could be so rudimentary, so commonplace, so everyday, utilitarian into something that is truly art. And so That is really the fpjourne brand in a nutshell. And so with fpjourne, basically in 1999 is when he kind of hit the scene and he unleashed his brand. And shortly thereafter, he opened up his workshop in the middle of Geneva, and he was really the only guy in the central of Geneva in Switzerland to be, manufacturing watches there. And so he kind of just really wanted to reinstill the Swiss spirit into his watches. And, a few years after that, he opens up a boutique in Tokyo, and if you look at the pictures, I've never been there, but the pictures are absolutely gorgeous. I mean, it looks more like a luxurious, loft or, a penthouse in a swanky district than a watch boutique. And so you can really feel the artistry behind kind of the brand and how they want to portray their watches as more piece of art. But it's also very interesting that they opened it in Tokyo out of all the places in the world. And because with fpjourne, I mean, you're really only buying these either pre-owned or you're buying them new from boutiques. Luckily, we have one here in Miami where I live at Bell Harbor Shops, and they have an fpjourne boutique, and the pickings are very slim there because, these are pretty hot watches in certain markets, including South Florida. So they don't have the most popular models there. Nonetheless, I digress, and it does show that the distribution is very limited and the production is even more limited. The exact number is a little rough, but we're looking at a little less than 1,000 pieces per year. I mean, that does fluctuate, and I don't have the exact number, but let's say between 800 and 1,000 pieces per year. He's been interviewed many times about this, and they can obviously, with this current staff, they can make many more watch pieces, but they would rather focus on the watches that they do release to be as good as possible, and they really do strive, and he really does strive to achieve that perfection in everything they do, including the watches that they put on the market. So they would rather focus on less, even if it's 200 less, if it means that, even marginally, incrementally, those watches, those 800, those 1,000 perhaps watches that they do release are even marginally better in higher quality just with the finishing. Because the other thing to keep in mind is, on the movement, and I'll talk about this in greater detail when we go under the lens, but all of the angles are polished. When you look at this, it does just looks like, okay, like at a distance, an in-house movement with some very nice decoration. But then when you look at it under lupe, every angle is polished or has some type of decoration, which is unbelievable, right? I mean, it's really more about like art and jewelry. It's almost like if you took a race car engine and then decorated it, right? It's crazy, but that's the brand, and it's very appealing to high-end collectors, of course, for those reasons. But what does follow is the high-end price tag. But if that is something you can kind of stomach, these are very cool watches. And so rolling into what fpjourne considers to be a chronometer. So the thing is, they make precision chronometers. And what they mean by that, and there is a document on their website where you can read all about this and how they kind of, how they feel about chronometers and how they feel about movement. So they acknowledge, as a professional watchmaker with, decades of experience and so much experience designing very difficult, high-end, complicated movements, his opinion, and it's a very interesting, and it is definitely a favorite opinion from watchmakers, and especially Swiss-trained or classically trained watchmakers, is that when you have a watch movement, the timekeeping, the gain or the loss, so gaining so many seconds per day or losing so many seconds per day, it really depends on so many things, like the temperature, right? Like these are mechanical movements, they change based on temperature, or they changed when the oils dry up. When oils dry up, the watch moves a little bit faster, typically, all other things being constant. So there's a few other pieces of criteria, but essentially what fpjourne believes is that just so long as that the movement keeps constant loss or gain per day, that loss or gain is okay as long as it's within reason. So in other words, if you're gaining 2 or 3 seconds, let's say you're gaining 3 seconds per day, fpjourne believes that as long as you're gaining that 3 seconds every day and it's constant and everything about the wearability and the oils and everything else, nothing else has changed, that is okay just so long as it doesn't change. One day it's 3, one day it's 5, now back down to 2. So everything about the brand is being as consistent and as punctual as possible, acknowledging that there are some things that they just can't change, and how someone swings their wrist, as well as how the oils dry depending on what type of climate you live in, and also how much this has been exposed to different other elements in the world, such as sunlight and heat and moisture and all that. So that's very interesting, and I think it really is something that watchmakers should keep in their mind, especially translated into other brands, right? I mean, to see someone making 30,000 plus all the watches in that ballpark, even higher, to say something like that and be a very, very skilled, highly decorated in terms of awards watchmaker it's something to keep in mind, especially considering the lower brands. So for those of you that like 0 seconds on a Longines or something, it really goes to show that as long as it's constant, I mean, you have perhaps the most respected watchmakers saying that it's not the biggest deal. So what I want to do now is I want to take this fpjourne Octa Lune and I want to put it under another camera angle that I have just set up over here, and I'm going to keep rolling here. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to get you behind the wheel of this, behind the engine, take a peek in the back, see what we're working with here, and I'm also going to tell you about the functions, because there's some very excellent, I can't stop looking at this, I'm sorry guys, how rude of me. There's some very excellent watchmaking. Let's get into it. I can't say anymore. And so what we have here, guys, is the fpjourne Octa Lune in platinum. Now, the first thing you notice is, and I'm going to excuse myself for the reflection here, and this is the first thing I'll tell you about this specific watch, is that fpjourne does not believe in AR coding. So while they use very excellent high-end components for their, for their crystals here, the thing you'll notice is that you do get reflection. And while I am in a fully lit studio here, you will be receiving reflections in other different types of lights, including variations of ambient lights, just because they do not believe in AR coding. And that's part of the mantra behind the fpjourne brand in the watchmaker Francois Paul Journe, is that they do not believe in incorporating anything into their watches that will not stand the test of time. So while you look at this watch, you'll see that certainly there's no AR coding, but you don't see anything else that will not stand the test of time, excluding the watch strap. And rolling into the watch strap, I want to focus on just the little subtleties of these watches, because that is really what high-end horology is all about here. When you look at the watch strap, so considering this is a precious metal watch, the thing that just aggravates me the absolute most with precious metal watches is having to change the strap. So for the average guy, he isn't practicing changing straps, and what that means is he scratches the back of the lugs, and you see this time and time over and over with a guy that owns a precious metal dress watch. And so what they've incorporated, and this is perhaps my favorite part of this watch and what fpjourne puts on the market, and it's silly, right? But nonetheless, they have the quick change straps here where you can just pull in and disassemble the strap and detach it from the watch. And going into the strap, it's perhaps one of the nicest straps I've ever seen, even from high-end manufacturers, other like Longa or Patek. This strap is just gorgeous. It's coated with some type of composite rubber material that makes it extremely comfortable to wear, considering it is an alligator strap. So rolling into the size, this is the 38, right? This is the 38 millimeter. We're going to go ahead and set this down so you can kind of just see proportionally what this looks like from a distance. So this is a 38 millimeter. Now fpjourne has taken this Octa Lune line and they have moved this up to a 40 millimeter, and they do have a limited edition, I believe, that is 42, but nonetheless the more commonplace is a 40. And what this means is that this older model, so this is their first Octa Lune, it's just smaller, so it wears more comfortably on the wrist. I have a 6.5, and it fits just absolutely perfect. So let's roll into the functions here, because I want to keep this short review very short, sweet, and to the point. What we have, the first thing you notice in terms of the functionality and the specs on this is you have a big date. And what this means is that with the date, you'll see that the date wheel is actually comprised of 2 wheels. And what this means is that when the date changes, and I'll go ahead and give it a change here, you'll see that the whole date doesn't change. It's just each wheel at a time. So when you pop it out to the first position, and when you move back, you'll notice that each wheel is completely independent of each other, and they are somehow connected by a series of gears. Now, that big date can be seen in other manufacturers, such as Glashütte and Lange for that matter, but nonetheless, it is a very nice complication to see on a dress watch, especially an over $20,000 precious metal dress watch. So the other thing you'll notice is that it has a moon phase. So at the 7 o'clock, you have a very, very nice moon phase. And the thing is with this moon phase, and what I usually hate about moon phases, is that they are just a pain to set. This one is delightful to set. Now watch very carefully as I rotate. In the first position pulled out, I'm moving clockwise the crown, and the moon phase is changing with us. And what that means is, setting a moon phase has never been easier. And for moon phase, those that are kind of shunned away and turned away from moon phases just because, they know they're not going to set them, it's a useless complication for them, including myself, this just makes it a breeze. And so I love it for that. Rolling into perhaps one of the best functions or features of an fpjourne is the 120 guaranteed hour power reserve. Now this means you could set a watch down for 120 hours and pick it up and it's still going to be running. The thing with fpjourne is they guarantee 120 hours, but they are known to run in certain conditions for an additional 2 days or 48 hours, meaning that after that 120 hour reserve runs out, you probably have another 2 days. They don't guarantee the accuracy to be within that precision chronometer standard that they have, but nonetheless, it probably will run and it should give you some buffer time in case you are in a coma. Running into the back of this watch, now we have to talk about the back of this watch. Now what we have on the back of this watch is a totally in-house caliber. Now the first thing that it absolutely screams is just high-end elegance and class. I mean, this is high-end horology, guys. What you'll notice is that it's completely decorated from head to toe. I won't get into all the technical aspects of the actual decoration because I'm not a polisher, but what I can tell you, and I want to keep this very brief, is that every single angle on the interior of this watch, and I'm going to try to get as close as possible to this, every single angle on the inside of this watch is entirely polished or decorated in some form or matter for that point. So what we have is we have an entirely decorated watch, and with a lot of high-end watches, and most watches for that matter, the insides either don't look as great close up under loop as they do out of the loop, or vice versa for that matter, but what they do is this one can be zoomed in as close as possible under a microscope or loop and just see the amount of time and the hours that are put into this watch taking care of the decoration and the little things, because as I mentioned, that is something fpjourne does probably better than anyone, is focus on the little details. Once again, they would rather release 800 perfect watches and make less money than release 1,200 or 1,400 almost perfect watches and make more money. That's just what they're about, or as long as that's what they're about for while fpjourne is still alive. We'll see what happens in the future, when the brand probably changes hands and, so on and so forth. But nonetheless, for current times, this is what fpjourne is doing with their back end or their business end of their pieces, and it's absolutely gorgeous. I want you to leave in the comments below what you think about it. I also posted to Instagram a few times comparing this movement shot with some other high-end Pateks, and I don't know, I just think that this caliber 1300 fpjourne movement is just absolutely gorgeous. It's hard to get it on camera to make it look as good as it does in real life. But if you ever have the opportunity to see one of these in real life, you're close to a boutique in New York or LA or Miami or Tokyo or Paris, I would check one of these out because everything by fpjourne is just gorgeous, beautiful, and it's more of a work of art than it really is a watch. So running into the rest of this dial very quickly, and one other function or rather feature of the case I need to show you is what you have these sub-dials, right? You have time over here, you have your standard time, and you have the small seconds there. And that's interesting, right? It gives a lot of, well, watches are typically symmetrical, right? You're keeping track of something and it needs to be symmetrical because that's how timekeeping works, right? The increments are all the same and that's how time passes. But with this watch, while it certainly takes care of that with your typical, watch or clock dial in that sub-dial to the right, everything else is very asymmetrical with the dial, and that it it's difficult, in my opinion, to really come up with a design that can be so asymmetrical but yet so perfect looking, right? It almost contradicts itself when you consider that this watch here is completely asymmetrical on the dial, but it just looks symmetrical to the naked eye. Leave in the comments if you agree with me or disagree with me on that, but in my opinion, and I've seen so many watches, it's extremely difficult to pull off an asymmetrical dial. It's just something that typically when I see an asymmetrical dial, I think they're very ugly and it looks cheap. But fpjourne has absolutely, in my opinion, been able to achieve something with asymmetrical dials that just screams class, elegance, and perfection, and that is what the brand is all about, isn't it? Now, not everything is perfect with the fpjourne watches. The thing I need to mention is that the lack of AR or anti-reflective coating on the crystals makes for this glare, right? We're not outside, we're in a studio, and so there are extra lights, but I can tell you that when this is worn outside, there is a lot of glare. That's something that is, standard across the board with fpjourne watches. They don't use the AR coating for the reasons I mentioned earlier. It also, AR coating can distract from the watch, right? Like you see a lot of beautiful blues when the light hits it with the blued hands of all types, but the lack of AR coating really can make it difficult in high light situations to see the dial. I don't know if you're wearing a $35,000 watch that, you're in the brightest of situations all the time. Perhaps this is not an everyday wear for you, but if you're thinking about it being an everyday wear, I might turn you away from this if that is bothersome to you, but I can understand why they did it. But nonetheless, it definitely makes it a bit of a pain to see the dial in certain lighting conditions. And the other thing that I would have to say is that I just don't like about it is that when you do pull out the crown to set the time, the seconds don't stop. And for a watch to not stop when you pull out the crown like that, sure, it makes it more difficult to be able to get precise timing and time this up with some type of atomic clock on the internet or your phone. And so I hope that the camera angle here was sufficient for you to check out the Journe Octa Lune and just the true beauty and the artistry behind the watch. Now, if the camera angle did do its trick and you haven't seen this watch, I'm sure you were certainly impressed by what the watch movement looks like. Hopefully the angles caught you just right, and the lack of AR coating on the crystal allowed you to check out the dial in its beauty in its entirety. But if not, I will have pictures here, and as well, you can also check out a lot of very great high-res photos on fpjourne's website. The thing is, with extremely high-end watches, they do take excellent photos, and there are many photos because after all, you are buying something very, very expensive, and they do want to make sure that you are impressed by what the watch looks like because after all, for many people, and including a lot of fpjourne collectors that I know, the looks and the beauty and the decoration is everything for them with fpjourne, and it's just something that, in my opinion, it's something that made the brand as extremely successful as it is. I mean, while their movements are incredibly technical, there's just something about the way that these look that make them so unique and very impressive. So talking about the price, we actually have this one on delraywatch.com. These pre-owned are roughly about $33,000. They have other fpjourne models that are much higher and some a little bit less as well, and some extremely desirable and hard to get, but nonetheless, this one can be seen on our website, delraywatch.com. Feel free to check it out and let us know if you have any questions about it. These watches can be very, I don't want to say they can be very off-putting for some, but for those of you that are not into the, the kind of the high-end luxury hot horology world, oftentimes these watches can be a little bit off-putting or a little bit intimidating, but if your budget can stomach this and you are impressed by high-end horology and you do agree with the mantra behind brands like fpjourne, it can be a very fulfilling experience, and these watches are only going up in value. fpjourne, I mean, as time goes on, fpjourne is becoming more and more of a powerhouse and a respected player in hot horology. And, someday when he stops making watches, I know that these things are going to skyrocket in price. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope that you enjoyed checking out the fpjourne watch. Check out more at delraywatch.com. Do not forget to like and subscribe if you like what you saw and heard. I do appreciate it, and it will keep me making great videos. I hope you guys all had a very happy holidays, and New Year's is coming up, so leave in the comments below what you're going to be doing for New Year's Eve. I'd love to hear it. Maybe you'll be wearing an fpjourne watch. I want to hear that for sure. Anyway, thanks for watching, guys. You've been chatting with John P. Ciao.